In the 1980s, there was a very specific moment you could experience in almost any shopping mall in America. You walk past the food court, past the music store, maybe the arcade, and then you'd see it. Soft lighting, a velvet backdrop, big hair in the window, and a sign that promised something quietly dramatic. Glamour shots. They weren't subtle, they weren't practical, and they weren't trying to be. Glamour shots were about transformation, about stepping out of everyday life and into a version of yourself that felt polished, dramatic, and just a little bit unreal. At a time when cameras were expensive and photography still felt formal, these mall studios offered something new. The idea that anyone could be photographed like a model, like a movie star, like a magazine cover, even if just for a day. The experience followed a familiar rhythm. You sat down in a chair under hot lights. A stylist teased your hair higher than you thought possible. Makeup was applied with confidence, and restraint was rarely part of the conversation. Soft focus lenses blurred edges, backgrounds faded into misty gradients, and suddenly you weren't just someone killing time at the mall. You were a portrait. The look was unmistakable: feathered hair, glossy lips, strong shadows softened by diffusion, poses that felt half fashion magazine, half high school yearbook. Every image leaned into drama, even when the subject was wearing a sweater they bought two stores down. That was the appeal. Glamour shots weren't about realism, they were about aspiration. In the 1980s, image mattered in a very specific way. Television was polished, music videos were theatrical, advertising was bold, the culture rewarded presentation, confidence, and larger than life style. Glamour shots fit perfectly into that ecosystem. They offered a controlled fantasy. For teenagers, it was a glimpse of adulthood. For adults, it was reinvention. For couples, it was documentation. For families, it was a milestone. These photos ended up in frames, wallets, scrapbooks, and drawers, resurfacing decades later with equal parts nostalgia and disbelief. And that's why they're remembered so vividly. Unlike candid photos, glamour shots were intentional. You planned them, you dressed for them, you committed to the look. There was no irony at the time, no wink. The seriousness was the point. That sincerity is what makes them funny now, but meaningful then. The mall itself played a crucial role. Shopping malls in the 80s weren't just retail spaces, they were social centers, places to see and be seen. Glamour shot studios sat comfortably among clothing stores and salons, reinforcing the idea that appearance was part of personal expression. They were accessible luxury. You didn't need a professional connection or a modeling contract. You needed a mall, a little money, and the willingness to sit under lights while someone told you to tilt your chin just a bit higher. For many people, this was the first time they had been photographed in a controlled, stylized environment. The results felt elevated, even if they were exaggerated. That exaggeration became the signature. As the 90s arrived, tastes shifted. Photography became more casual, digital cameras emerged, natural light replaced studio setups. The idea of heavily styled portraits began to feel dated. Glamour shot studios quietly disappeared from malls, replaced by phone stores and kiosks selling novelty items. But the images never left. They lived on in family albums and social media posts decades later, often shared with affectionate humor, not because they were embarrassing, but because they captured a moment when people were unafraid to take themselves seriously. And that's something we don't see as often anymore. Today, photography is constant, filters are instant, images are disposable. The commitment that glamour shots required feels almost radical now. You couldn't retake them endlessly. You couldn't preview them instantly. You trusted the process, and you waited days or weeks to see the result. That waiting mattered. It made the photo feel important. Looking back, glamour shots tell us more than just how people dressed or styled their hair. They show how people wanted to be seen: confident, polished, dramatic, unapologetic. They reflect a culture that celebrated presentation without irony. And while it's easy to laugh at the soft focus and oversized hairstyles, there's something admirable in that confidence. The willingness to step into a studio in the middle of a mall and say, "This is me, turned up a little." Glamour shots weren't about authenticity in the modern sense. They were about intention, about choosing a version of yourself and committing to it fully. That's why they endure, not because they were perfect, but because they were earnest. In an era obsessed with polish and performance, glamour shots gave everyday people a moment to feel extraordinary. And decades later, those images still tell that story, one soft focus portrait at a time.